nonprofit organization that does research, advocacy, education, other things and services for students in the public interest here on campus. And I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we are on unceded or Tongan Saanich land. I'd like to acknowledge that history of colonization, and also acknowledge that, although most of us here are, African, Black people, people of diverse origins. I'm a settler of color, originally from Nigeria, and my parents moved here to immigrate for various reasons. And it's important to understand that although I personally have histories of colonization, as Nigeria was colonized by the British, I am actively colonized this land because I live here now. So let's keep that framework in mind as we go through this conversation and be mindful of that. So I'm going to start off by introducing the panelists here. The conversation is about sexism, but our perspectives of sexism as Africans. So it's going to be intriguing. The panelists are very opinionated. I know a lot of them. I know all of them personally. So I'm going to start on this far, the right corner over there, with Nopal. Nopal has chosen to identify himself as an Anglophone poet and writer. His writings have appeared in Snapdragon Journal and Pakistan Review and several Arabic journals. He'll be sharing his understanding of sexism and feminism in the North African region. Thank you. And a feminist. Next to Katie is Emmanuel. Emmanuel, during the course of this conversation, will share his idealistic view of sexism in a socio-cultural context and the idea of modern-day perceived sexism. He says that the topic of sexism tends to evoke anger, but is passionate about it because he's a man living in a sexist culture and has a tendency to be sexist without meaning to. He says he sees this conversation as a challenge to all individuals to understand the effects of prejudice and its course through an entire lifetime. Next to Emmanuel, we have Terira, or as we call her, Tari. Terry grew up in Zimbabwe and is passionate about alleviating poverty within Africa and participated in its development. She considers herself a woke African and seeks to take pride in her cultural heritage without excusing the problematic aspects within it. Tari's passion for African development and willingness to grow and mature her perspectives gives her an objective view of how cultural norms can contribute to sexism. And last but not least, we have Victoria. Victoria is a first-generation Sudanese Canadian who's tired of being expected to brew tea for her older and able male relatives. Yes. Her passion in this topic stems from trying to break the prescribed gender roles in Sudan that are being changed within the diaspora that mimics it. She brings the perspectives of both Sudan and the Sudanese diaspora in Canada. Please welcome our panelists. So the first question I have for the panelists is the long one. And I told them earlier I'm going to pick people to answer like an African teacher. The first question is there a universal understanding of sexism, and is it useful to think about sexism from different socio-cultural perspectives? I'll let you guys go first. I'm going to pick people. Yeah. Who's going to start?
Sure. Okay, so should I use a microphone or?
Please do.
Yeah, I'm very expressive, with my hand gestures. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So in order to answer this question, I want to start by defining sexism as it's defined in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I have that definition right here. So sexism is stereotype, no discrimination, typically against women on the basis of sex. So it could happen against men. However, while it's possible for a man to be treated in a discriminatory manner based on his sex, it's very unlikely to happen. Simply because masculinity is never ridiculed, it's never looked down upon. Some men have been made fun of and ridiculed for being effeminate or for not being masculine enough. So here I'm going to address the question as misogyny, which is discrimination against women on the basis of sex, because I don't believe that it's common that men get discriminated against based on their sex. So for me, I think our understanding of any social issue is highly dependent on our lexicon and use of language that we use to address this issue. So I'm here representing the North, not necessarily representing the North African region, but talking about it. And it's an Arab majority region. And in Arabic, we don't have a word for sexism actually. So we say tamiz al-mar'a, which means discrimination against women. And even we don't even have a word for feminism either. It has recently been added to the Arabic language like almost 3 years ago or something. And we say nasawiyya, but for so long we used to say tahrir al-mar'a, which means liberation of women. So it's very different. It's a very different understanding of sexism. So while there are certain similarities between our universal understandings of sexism amongst different cultures, it still differs. And I think it's very important to examine sexism from a socio-political perspective. Because what might be deemed as a sexism issue in North America, for example, like abortion, is not deemed as such in North Africa. Abortion is hardly ever talked about as an issue of sexism in North Africa. It's rather talked about from a religious perspective and a religious angle. That's it.
Yeah, my name is Katie. Immediately answering if I think there's a universal understanding of sexism, I think there isn't, but I think there's a universal understanding of like discrimination against women and inequality, but I think sexism in itself, and Noel is getting to that with the use of language, I would say there isn't because of religion, because of like different economic systems and progress of history. So I would say that sexism universally, no, but I think that, or I would like to believe that there is a universal consciousness regarding human dignity, and I think that if we do have that respect for human dignity, the necessary implication would be like that it should be across the sexes, and I think that sexism or like discrimination against women, particularly or inequality, comes as a result of like economic systems, and so that's where I would come to it. And just when I think of universal understanding of sexism, I also think like, are people born sexist? And then I would say that no, I would say that there's a blank state, and I would say that people are like socialized to respect a sex more or regard a sex more or even classify the possibilities that a sex can achieve. Yeah, and I think it's mandatory to think of sexism from different socio-political perspectives because obviously the present day hasn't come from a vacuum. It's a reaction to historical processes and economic decisions or systems, and just even cultural systems and religious beliefs, but also like movements within that. So I think it's necessary when we're analyzing sexism and inequality to think of like the historical progress and the relationships within societies, but also between societies.
Hello everyone. Let's just begin. I would approach that question by starting with the second part, which says is there useful? Is it useful to think about sexism from a different social and cultural perspective? And I'll say, it is useful to think of sexism in a social and cultural perspective because if you look at the sexism perspective, you can see that it's been expressed in different forms as to religious ideologies, as to cultural norms, as to economical structure. So I would say it is useful to think about it that way because the forms at which an individual express sexism, either to either genders, depend on the social cultural perspective, depends on the perspective. So, for example, you can look at sexism from, let's say, more structured sexism from the educational structure. So, from several perspectives, I think if you look at that, there are several forms that individual can be sexist. And also, if you look at the question, is there a universal understanding of sexism? I would say there is no universal understanding of sexism. It's just, from my own perspective, you could say sexism is the oppression of a gender, not specifically a man or a woman. for a gender, either it's a male or female, right? It is when one gender, a person of a gender. There's this idea that the structure of the gender is superior and has more advantage than the other gender. So there is no way of expressing sexism as a universal concept. It's basically on individual basis. Right? Each individual has a form to which this could be expressed, could be affected by this time in several forms. So for that question, I would say that's my take on it. So there is no universal understanding of sexism. It's just basically a social line.
As mentioned, my name is Tari. So just going off of what my panelists have said, I too agree that there is no universal definition of sexism. And to take that further, I think that the sexism as seen through the Western perspective is very different as that of the African perspective, because we have so many cultures. Within my country alone, Zimbabwe, we probably have more than 30 languages that are spoken. Although cultural norms are to a large extent national, they do taint how people view sexism and what they see as just values. For example, men have traditionally been the breadwinners, and up till this day, men are the breadwinners to the largest extent. And this changes the way that relationships are handled. It changes the status of the man. And it's different from the Western world, where women have been given more opportunities. There's a higher economic level, and there are more opportunities in general for women, and that changes the way that the women themselves within African societies view themselves. Because if you've grown up thinking this is how it's meant to be, you don't necessarily view it as sexism. So I believe that to a large extent, a lack of exposure changes your perspective, and to some extent distorts it.
I'd actually like to disagree with the words that you guys. I feel like there is a universal understanding of sexism. It's just what specifically constitutes that sexism is the question. So what I wrote down was like my grandmother, who she was raised in rural Juba. There was a clear division of labor. Men were expected to herd the cattle, do whatever, and women stay at home and nurse and do the daily housework activities. So to her, that seems perfectly fair. If you mimic that or mirror that in the Western world, they might think that it's not the same thing. Why would, sorry, I'm very nervous right now. It's important to think of it from various social, cultural perspectives, because gender roles are culture specific, which is why I can do that example of my grandmother. Yeah.
So you're saying that there is a universal understanding of sexism.
It's just what constitutes sexism is where we have got it mixed.
As we talk about that and the cultural specificities, does that make sense? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Is there a role of feminism in African societies? Nicole, you talked about how feminism was not even a word until recently in the Arab dictionary, and people think of things like Afrofeminism, which is something that I talk about a lot. What does feminism look like in Africa, and what's the role of feminism in African societies?
So it's very interesting. While we didn't necessarily have a word for feminism in the Arabic language, Feminism has such old roots in North Africa, and people since the 1800s have been writing books about the liberation of women and women's rights. And we have very prominent feminist thinkers in the 1800s, like Qasim Amin, who's a man, and also Huda Sha'rawi, who's a woman. And in the 19th century in North Africa, we have this prominent feminist thinker who's actually revolutionary. Her name's Nawal Saadawi, and she was the first to talk about the sexuality and the body of women. So feminism does play a role in North African societies and African societies in general, and the African diaspora. Feminism in North America, however, tends to be not very representative of minorities, racialized minorities, but I think this goes beyond the scope of this conversation. But going back to the accomplishments in feminism in North African societies, just recently, 2 months ago in Tunisia, there was this law that passed that permitted Muslim women to marry any man despite his religion, which is a very groundbreaking accomplishment because it's one of a kind in North African societies and also in the Arab world. So before that, a man was allowed to marry as any woman despite her religion, but a woman was not allowed to. And also now they're preaching gender equality in terms of inheritance laws and such. So it does play a role. It has always played a role. It's not a Western invention. It's so old in our roots, but we just need it differently and looked at it differently.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that. So I'm from Guinea. I'm Fulani. I'm the second ethnicity in Guinea. We're 98, 99% Muslim, and in Fulani we don't again have a word for feminism in itself in the way that we do in English language, but we do have a general concept of the importance of the woman in our culture and how inextricable womanhood and that glory of the woman and the importance is. So I think I would say that we have a concept about it, but it's not articulated in the same way that it is in the English language. And I think that's actually a positive thing because it shows that respect and regard for women and understanding her crucial role in our society is so obvious that it's almost taken for granted. And I think in the same way that's positive, it's also negative because it's difficult to have a discourse in Fulani and to have this idea of equality of the genders in terms of what we can do and removing barriers limits if you don't have that word that articulates specifically in English when you say feminism. So and in particular in Guinea about the role of feminism, we're one of the countries who's ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. However, in our constitution, we do still have elements that I would say aren't feminist or perhaps are show the gender inequality that we have. So I wanted to bring up 2 examples. Since we have a mix of religious law and French civil code. Obviously, we're a former French colony, and we also have religious law and just customary law. We still have a part of our constitution that says that the man is the head of the household. And another thing, just to show the inequality between man and woman, we have a man can ask for divorce on the grounds of adultery if the woman has committed it. However, a woman cannot go to the court to ask for adultery unless the man has committed it in the home. So things like this, you could see the distinction between, and these are just little examples. But I would say that in terms of when I lived in Guinea and when I go on holidays, every single huge event is the women making them. So I think that feminism as a concept is there and we see the importance of women. However, I think when we're talking about it and in our discourses, we also tend to eliminate women despite the fact that we are the epicenter of our society. So it's a double bind, I would say, from my understanding.
From my own perspective, the role of feminism in African society. You could say that, you could look at this from African society before you talk about feminism. You need to look at how the construct of African society is. From my own perspective, I'm going to be very specific. so I don't generalize Africa as one place. From my perspective, if you look at the social construct of Nigeria, which I'm Nigerian, I've lived my whole life in Nigeria, except when I moved here. The way it is structured, it is no one is asking you not to. The idea of gender equality is in the subconscious of an individual. No one is asking you to be oppressed. No one is asking you to, subconsciously put yourself below the other gender. No one is asking you to do that. But the whole social construct is male dominant, and so that plays a psychological role in an individual when you're making decisions. It plays a psychological role in an individual if you're going to pursue a career path which you see that's more male dominant. It plays a role in, to be more specific, a woman. If you're going to perform a certain task, if you're going to choose to look a certain way, the idea that a person's opinion on you is going to be based solely on your gender. Now, if you try to understand African or Nigerian social construct in that way, and you put the idea of feminism to an individual. Now, the idea of feminism, you put that idea into an individual that we're supposed to be equal, which is true, we're supposed to be equal. The male and the female is supposed to be equal by every right. Now you put the idea into an individual based on the social construct. It's gonna create conflict between the individual because we're supposed to be equal at the same time. There's some religious norms in African culture, in African society, in Nigerian society, that there's a certain tax the man is supposed to do, a certain role, not tax, role, a certain gender is supposed to play, and a certain role another gender is supposed to play. So if you put the idea of feminism into an individual's head, it's going to strike conflict because the way the basis has been laid, that we're supposed to have several roles. It doesn't quite match. So if you say a man is a sexist to a woman, and you put that you look at that from an African perspective, from a Nigerian perspective, not necessarily sexist. The man is just trying to go by what he's been brought up with. He's trying to go by his own basis. Now, it could be done subconsciously, it could be done unintentionally, right? But not necessarily is he sexist. You're perceiving him as being sexist. You're just perceiving. It's just the idea of perception. And
Let me see if I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that because of how certain societies, specifically in Nigeria, your interpretation is that in Nigeria, for instance, things are done in a certain way. There's a role for the man and there's a role for the woman. So because of how people are brought up into thinking that a man and a woman have certain roles, if people think about feminism, a person could be perceived as being sexist, although this person may not be sexist, they're just doing what they think cultural norms are. Is that your argument?
yes, exactly that. And if you look at the role of sexism in Africa, you could say it's a way of striking the ground in an individual's mind.
Don't you think that there's room for people to think of culture in more than traditional ways? So I think how I think of Nigerian culture, I think culture is constantly evolving. And I think that over the years, Nigerian people, since we're talking about Nigeria, have imagined Nigeria to continue to evolve. So at one point, women would only do certain things, women only worked in certain industries, and now because of more representation of women, I think that is feminism. And I think because culture is constantly evolving, people are able to imagine Nigerian society to be more equal, although you're saying that that's not the case.
If you even take away the construct of the role of women in the workforce, if you can take away that, you put the role of women in the home, right? Culture is evolving, but you could say the role is still the same. It's not necessarily evolving at the same pace at which the general culture is evolving. Let's say you look at the home, you have the duties of the woman still unbalanced, still fairly unbalanced. The issue of chores and taking care of things is still pretty unbalanced, and you have the woman performing domestic tasks that a man will not perform. Not necessarily because he feels superior. It's just the way it is.
What do you think, Carrie?
Okay, so the role of feminism, I will be honest, I come from a country where the word feminism is like a dirty word. Basically because feminism is associated with disrespectful women. My neighbors, I come from Zimbabwe, my neighbors are South Africa, Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique, and almost regionally, it's seen as a disruptive force because traditionally the women within our culture that are valued are strong mothers who are in some ways soft, but in many ways resilient. And even our cultures really value respect. So respect for how you talk to not only the men, but also the women. And I think that there's this big dichotomy between the Western world and, I won't generalize, but just my region of the world, in that the terms and values we see, the things we see as respectful, and the norms and I guess things that we do are very different. So I think that the role of feminism that I appreciate is that it starts conversations, because there's no progress where there's no conversation. But I think that the conversation shouldn't sound, we shouldn't be projecting the same conversations as you hear across the sea from people who have a different culture to us, who've never experienced the same things as us. The conversation should sound different when you're speaking from an African perspective, right? Not because we want to excuse certain things, but because our cultural norms and values are so different. And I think one thing that I noticed about people who were feminists within my country was they weren't as effective. Not because their concerns were invalid, but because if you're in a culture, you have to but you have to be able to, perform within it. By this I mean, for example, you mentioned brewing tea for your dad or whatever. The way that a woman in my country would do it is, yes, you make tea, but you say what you want to you say what you want to say. You know what I mean? Because that would be considered a point of disrespect. And I guess, for example, there are a lot of women who, in my view, had husbands who did a lot of bad things to them, but they were able to, for lack of a better word, they were able to kind of manipulate the situation. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but I guess the playing on the softness, because if you're in a culture where being too outspoken or too this or too that doesn't get you anywhere, people close their ears to you. And I've kind of had this conversation with even university students within my own country who say, oh, you're feminist, that means you're rude, that means you'll be a bad wife. And you're meeting up against so many opinions. So for me, the easiest way to get the conversation across was understand who you're speaking to. Don't change your message, but change the way you say it.
I'm going to respond to that, Carrie, because I agree that in many African societies, feminism is considered a bad word. But I think, for me at least, the essence of that understanding that it's a bad word is a misunderstanding of feminism. I think that when people think of feminists, they think of, the really loud, outrageous people. But I think if you really understand that, at least how I see feminism is the equality of genders, right? I think that oftentimes, especially
in our society today and people our age, oftentimes people practice feminism. Every day we practice feminism as women, you know. I think when I was living in Botswana, you know, the idea of like gender-based violence and how lots of African societies are super like, we need to stop this. That's a feminist idea. You know, there's so many ideas of feminism that we practice, but if we don't use the label feminism, and I think that's the most powerful form of activism. Thinking of being in Canada, a person could be racist and you're not gonna yell, oh my God, you're racist, let's talk about it kind of thing. And I think the most effective types of feminism maybe in the African context is feminism that's not loud and labeled feminism, but the everyday things that you do that makes our society more equal.
Sorry, I hope I'm not speaking for too long, but I think that one thing that has changed the conversation is African women are now more educated than ever. Even from the lady selling tomatoes across the road, she was respected because people could see that she was hustling. She was thinking long term, and I think that that changes the conversation when women are more educated, have a higher economic status, and I think that, yeah, without that, the conversation will always be of a power struggle.
The role of feminism in Africa to me, or specifically to Sudan, is like a tool of change. For example, my mom, she was part of one of the contemporary feminist groups. They didn't use the word feminism. They ran with, okay, equality, we want to go to school too, we deserve to go to school too. But the word feminism, like you said, wasn't used, but they had that feminist ideals, equality. Basically it as a tool for change and motivation. And from what I can tell right now, there's more women choosing to go to school in Sudan rather than staying at home and just because they're not, that's not the only thing they believe that they're able to do. So a change of, yes.
Can you respond briefly? Because this is like so many different things I know. Okay, so first, I think I wanted to, I understand that, like, I understand the angle of not, you know, being too feminist and being too crazy, but I think there's also, you know, to remember that feminism in itself is a revolutionary idea. It is disruptive, and yeah, it is, and that's why you have so many reactions like that, because we shouldn't dilute it, because the idea, if we assume that we live in systems that are based on like unequal relationship of women, and if we accept the assumption that, you know, capitalism is bad and like patriarchy is bad, yeah, this idea is revolutionary, and it is shaky. And I think the one thing that I would critique is the way that when I lived in Africa, in the Congo and in Guinea, the word respect was often used to silence me as a woman. Both on religious grounds, and also just culturally, because is it really respect, or is it like power relations? When you're able to be told to be quiet, not because your ideas are like disrupting tradition, but because you're not respecting somebody, it's almost like a camouflage word for saying, we're not, this is like, it's a given, and therefore it's not subject to critique, it's just, we just take this for granted. And I think that the word respect has been used a lot to silence women, or to just, you know, make them, if you're not silencing them, you make them seem like viceful, like they're revolute, they're disrespectful. And mostly when our societies are so religious, it's so easy to say it's an immoral woman. It's a woman who doesn't understand, you know, respect man's, you know, God-given superiority and things like that. So I would just react to the word of using respect. And also, finally, just on a political level, this is kind of going, it's just a nuanced argument, so maybe it might be contradicting myself, but if we accept colonialism and the fact that these African states are new and they're fragile states, we could say relatively, so because we've been subject to like coup d'etats by foreign powers so many times, ideas of feminism that do shake the founding myths of our cultures and the assumptions that we have in the law, yeah, it makes sense why a lot of people are so reactionary to this. But I think it would be not specifically because they're sexist, but just because they're trying to maintain a social order when internally there is tribal structures because of false divisions made up, and also externally with the power of Western ideologies that are literally conflicting with indigenous knowledge. So add feminism on top of that, and it's how do we have order? So yeah.
I think to basically summarize what you guys are saying, there's the more louder version of feminism, and that I think that applies to the West, to Canada as well. There's the loud, I'm gonna go to a march feminism, and then there's the more subtle, everyday, I'm gonna fight for equality or just go to school, which is as feminist as a person who's yelling the word feminism and going to a march. I think there's room for both or multiple versions of feminism in the African context, and I'm excited that hearing from all of you, we're making room and reflecting on how feminisms even are reflected on the continent. So going back to what Katie just said, which you can already got us talking about that, colonization. When I thought of this question, I thought of how African cultures, for the most part, are mostly oral. So thinking of what our societies look like pre-colonization is really hard to imagine because we don't have a lot of written information about what that looked like. So try to answer this question as best as you can. Has colonization had an impact? Did colonization have an impact on gender relations in Africa? And how do we even know that?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. So I'm going to start by saying how colonization affects our perception of the female body. So what colonization does, not only does it seize more land, not only does it deprive indigenous people of natural resources and economic opportunities, and moreover disparages the body of the colonized, and this is very important. It deems the body of the colonized as worthless, as literally nothing. And what happens, the female body during colonization gets violated by rape, and also the way they do that is that they associate a lot of negative characteristics with the female body to make it seem worthless, like promiscuity, like being dirty, and then what this happens is literally leads to more control over the female body by the indigenous population, because the body of the female becomes symbolic of that of the land. It becomes literally synonymous to the land, and there's more protection over it. I was reading an article this morning about how colonization has led to a complete change of perception of the female body of the Egyptian women, So it does affect that, and yeah, so the colonizer deems that the body of the indigenous person as its property, and I think that does affect how we view gender relations and how we view women, and I think that just denigrates women more, and it leads to more misogyny, more hatred of women, more orthodoxy in society, because they're trying to protect women by restricting the freedom of her body, but also into literally violating the female body too. So yeah, colonization has done a lot of messed up stuff in Africa, and I think it's very important to always be aware that we are colonized people. Not formal colonies, I don't believe in that. We're still undergoing the effects of colonization, and we will for so long. So it's very important to be aware of that fact.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Nofal said. And I think that this question is so important because how can we talk about anything on that continent without taking the historical perspective? I think a lot of misunderstandings. Can I share a little anecdote? When I had a friend ask, we were talking about politics, and she says to me, "Oh my God, why haven't we Africans figured out how to do government yet?" And I was like, well, if they would stop trying to overthrow our government, it'd be a good start, Because and that just shows how I'm reacting historically, and someone's just coming out of a vacuum. But just a little fun joke. I think that this question on gender relations in Africa, I think that when we talk about colonization and the industrialization and the expansion of capitalism across the European continent into Africa, we should talk about the sexual division of labor that ensued with the introduction of colonization, colonial states in Africa, and the public-private distinction, and the fact that private labor, or traditionally women's labor, has been devalued within this system. So I'm just gonna that's my angle on this. So I would say that initially, what I understood, at least in Fulani cultures, the historically nomadic cultures and like herding and things like that, like with the cows and farm stuff. In addition, in original, like in the way that we began, women and men would be out in the fields working collectively together, and there was not, even if there was a division of labor, it wasn't like institutionalized and like so constructed as it is today. And I would say that the impact of colonization and capitalism and the ethics that ensued is that labor was taken away from women and given exclusively to men. But not only that, it's the value of the labor. So the fact that if you are working in the field as a man, you are elevated, and when we are going to make decisions in our society, the man who works more will be the one who's taken into consideration. Whereas the private sphere, so like the reproduction, the fact, like it's everything, it's so massive, and yet in capitalism it's so devalued at the same time, but as it's devalued, it's glamorized, so it's almost like there's like a justification for, how can you be doing so much work on top of, raising babies, feeding children, organizing community events, teaching, a secular, coursework and also religious coursework, and you're not getting that value, you're not getting the voice to make decisions in society. It's almost glamorized as if that's the ideal woman. So I think that would be one of the impacts of colonization on gender relations. And I would say that just on the psyche of, as a Black woman and my psyche, I would say that seeing the manner by which the man jobs, even that word is like absurd, right? But like male jobs are legitimate and ought to be aspired for. So like if you're a woman and if you're intelligent, you should be going in fields like of your father, as opposed to looking at your mother as like, oh, how many times have I said, oh, she's just a housewife, or she just manages, like she just, So I think that it's entrenched in the psyche, this colonial introduction of sexism, but I also think that it wasn't only a one-way street. I think there was an exchange of ideas, but I think that indigenous forms of, at least when it comes to like economics, wasn't valued as much, and it was deemed to be like, you don't understand efficiency, it's backward. But I would say, as a Fulani, even if we don't take into account colonization, so like counter historically, it would just be religious code then, where you will find other sources of our like enslavement or lack of emancipation. So I think that the history has an incredible role, but I also think that it's in the psyche, and that's why it's so difficult. There's like the idea of like double consciousness, where like I think it's like you see yourself as you are, but also as how your oppressor sees you. And I think that in the African context, when I lived in Guinea and I lived in the Congo, it's like kind of crazy because you look at yourself as like a Black person in Africa, but you're also critiquing yourself as like an outsider. So every gesture you make is like, are you the good or the bad? Are you the civil or the uncivil? Are you like backward or forward? Are you contributing to the process of progress? Yeah, sorry, it's just really long, so yeah.
Katie she's brought up a lot of good points, and I'm just gonna approach that question from a different perspective because of her point. And for me, looking at gender relations in Africa, you have to look at what colonialism brought into Africa. It's brought a wave of new terms, which we put in English, right? Which we all used to relate, and which the word sexism and everything just comes from, right? So the way gender relation has been in Africa before colonialism, came in, and before most of the continent became, oppressed by a particular oppressor, the way each gender has related has its own state, has its own form. And it's more in a civil way. It's the way at which the male gender and the female gender has the relation at which they had for colonialism is very in a state, whereas a man knows his role, he knows his function, whereas colonialism brought in a new ideology, purpose, and equality in each gender. So each gender knows that, because I am oppressed, because I've been through the whole process of colonialism and kind of my independence, at this point, I'm supposed to be at a certain level. And
I'm not sure I understand you.
it,
So you're saying,
I'm saying, I'm saying in most African countries, right? Most African countries has been colonized, right? Colonialism has brought into context wave of ideas, whereas which an African person will perceive himself as, right? He perceives himself as being, superior to the opposite gender, if you're male in the Pacific. You will perceive yourself as being superior. Why? Because you've done a lot of domestic functions, a lot of functions that make you feel more masculine, feel more superior. It's just a term superior in that form, right? So if you look at the context of the whole, right, and how colonialism has brought into play a wave of ideas in the home, right? So look at the way man is going to relate to the woman in the home. It's going to feel the woman is supposed to be subordinate. It's going to feel the woman is supposed to perform roles and tasks that he.
so you're saying that colonization has brought this wave of African masculinity that relates to sexism because men feel that they're superior due to their labor?
Yes.
Oh,
And from that perspective, you could say that the way man and woman is going to relate to each other with the new wave of ideas and the new logic of thinking that the woman is going to relate. I'm supposed to be equal to this man. We're supposed to be on the same level field. And if you look at if you put an idea, the way a woman is going to raise her child is she's going to give the boy maybe a toy that is more masculine, maybe a gun or a truck, and she's going to give her daughter maybe a doll. And you see the term, if a boy is crying, he's going to say, "Oh, don't cry like a baby," right?
and that's because of colonization, essentially.
Yeah, it's because colonialism has brought in a new wave of ideas. Without colonialism, the way an African society would be, it's very different. It's you wouldn't have the ideas of sexism and equality would not necessarily, like Katie said, it's going to be more respect. Right?
Carrie, what do you think?
So before we go anything further, I just wanted to clarify that because I think that sometimes when we have panels, you're discussing negative aspects of your cultures. But just to clarify, within Africa, there are good men, who do all for their families, don't oppress their wives. So just to put that out there, my dad is one of them. So, on to how colonization has had an impact on gender relations. I'm coming at it from a different perspective of how women, in particular the black women, has been viewed. Because if you're now in a colonial society where the high-ranking woman happens to be white because she's part of a colonial sect, you're in a weird situation where it's a black majority country, but somehow within the psyche of generations of children who've been born in this system, black women aren't seen as beautiful as white women. And where this results in sexism is that you can be a black woman and you're even below a white woman. So it's not even just sexism anymore. Because of colonialism, you have colorism, even amongst black people. Being lighter is seen as, you're the bitter, I don't know what word to use, but so I think that colonization also changed the way we perceive ourselves. It brought a lot of self-hate. Within my own life, I've had people try and convince me that because I'm dark, there's something wrong with me, and I'm like, excuse me, this country has a lot of black people who look exactly like me. You can't play that with me. Yeah, I think that just the way women view ourselves, if you look at another situation like apartheid within South Africa, that's even like colorism on steroids, because now you have people separating brown, black, white, and you can guess which neighborhoods are the nicest ones. So I think that, yeah, just the impact of it on colorism and our societies and how our women are brainwashed into thinking that they're less than because of this colonial influence.
Colonization and its impact in Sudan specifically, both countries, they're not really secular. The north is more Islamic, and the south follows Catholicism. So with the impact of that, there's been a lot of, and the addition of the Abrahamic religions, the books, the Quran and the Bible, the gender roles in there has been delegated to the women in those society. I remember my grandma telling me that I'm actually so rude sometimes. I don't follow her instructions. She'll tell me to do something and I'll be like, okay, I'm not your wife. Do it yourself. So she'll tell me that my husband, he'll hit me if I don't learn how to cook this specific meal that's like easy to do or whatever. And that's an expectation. It says so in the Bible, like that you're able to lift your hand on your woman. That's your property. I can't quote it, but it's in there. So that's the impact of Arab and British colonization in Sudan. But I wouldn't say that it's significant, as my father he doesn't prescribe to these roles or expectations of me, as she said, not all men are like this. So I wouldn't hold the impact of colonization as that specific factor of gender relations within the African scope, but it's something to be talked about.
Thank you, everybody. So we've been talking a lot about African men, and this is something that we chatted about, that we didn't want this conversation to be, African men are terrible because that's racist. And I think for us, at least when we were talking about, like envisioning, we talked about how, men in general can be shitty, awful, sorry, Catholic people. Men in general can be awful, and but we're talking about it specifically as Africans because that's our perspective. So that's something to keep in mind, which leads me to my next question. I'll start with you, Victoria. So if we think of men being able to objectify women and being sexist, as many men can be, do you think that there is a double standard when we think of or talk about African men as, being really hyper sexist or hyper this and that due to X, Y, Z racist factors? Is there a double standard in thinking of African men and sexism?
Is there a double standard of thinking? Personally, I talk about sexism within the African scope because it's of its proximity to me. They're my fathers, my brothers and uncles. I don't think there is, but how do you feel about that, Tara?
I would say that the cultural aspect of it, and I guess the lines of respect that have been drawn could be like a scapegoat for what is considered sexist and what isn't. So I could see that as being part of the double standard.
for the panel, when we were doing the panel, a lot of questions came up. We had a discussion, and in that discussion, I took some good notes. I noticed that there were some questions we deemed offensive to each gender. Now, see, that's a very tricky thing about sexism. When is it right to say all men are sexist? So is it right to say a man is sexist? Well, you need to understand this that if you say you should not say a man is sexist or you should not generalize it as sexism, because you can't really say a man is not sexist if you're living in a sexist culture. That was what led me to put my intro there, because I realized that there were some questions we were supposed to ask, there were some things we were supposed to talk about, and because we deemed it offensive to a particular gender, or we deemed it offensive, or we deemed it's going to strike a nerve with a particular person based on their gender in the whole topic, we kind of eliminated those questions. And actually, that's a huge problem in the whole conversation of sexism. Right? If you're deciding to eliminate a question or cancel a question based on the opinion of the other gender, it's basically you're oppressing one gender and prioritizing another gender.
Are there questions that you'd like to address that you feel were left out?
Pardon?
Are there questions you'd like to address that you feel were left out?
No, absolutely not. We have a very good and broad questions. And,
Just checking.
And that was what led me to put my intro in the whole thing that not all men are sexist. It's good to put it this way, and it's also good to put it this way for an African man. Not all men are sexist, but if you live in a sexist, if you live in a sexist culture, you tend to tap into the power, into the whole structure. So if you live in a sexist culture, you tend to tap into the power of the whole existence of sexism. And therefore, by doing that, you are sexist. So you plan on not being sexist, you set out not to be sexist, but you live in a sexist culture, and you partake and you gain from the sexist culture. You are sexist. You tend not to try and act out the whole way the whole culture has been for you.
Nopal has a...
You gain from it.
Nopal is... Just... Yeah, I need to talk. Go ahead, Nopal.
So I think it's very important to acknowledge that there isn't a certain type of a man made. Not every man are heterosexual, not all of them objectify women, not all of them want to be with women, period. No, honestly. So the thing is, it's very important to know that in the existence of education, like not all men can be sexist if they're taught about sexism as a social issue since a very, very young age. I myself, as a queer man, I don't refuse to be with a woman. If anyone's able to hit me up, but I haven't been with a woman yet. But the thing is, I never thought of this is so loud. Sexism has never been something that I acquired, not because I'm a queer man, but because I had such a great inspirational mother who taught me about sexism since a very young age. But not only that, I really observed misogyny through my mother's different experiences with sexism. I saw how it was very difficult for her to pursue her master's degree without my father's approval, because he didn't want her to go and get another degree because he didn't want her to be better. I saw how difficult for her was to get a divorce in a patriarchal country where women hardly ever initiate divorce. But not only that, for as long as I could remember, I remember my mother crying because of the harassment by strangers and by her brothers because she's never worn a hijab, she didn't cover up enough. So I think if you educate children from a very, very young age, especially men about sexism, they don't necessarily acquire it. It's very possible to be a man and not to be sexist, and it's very important to know that there are so many different types of men. Not all of us are straight, stereotypical straight African dudes, you know?
Is there a double standard though?
Absolutely, there's a double standard. There's always a double standard when we're talking about racialized individuals, especially in North America. For example, white women do kill their wives, right? We never ever refer to it as an honor crime. We only refer to it as a domestic abuse issue. Let an African kill his wife, and we're all like, Africans are sexist, Africans are disgusting, blah, 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 right? So there's always a double standard. We live in a white supremacist society, not only in Canada, even in Africa, they're white supremacists because they've been conditioned to believe they're inferior to those who are white. So that's the thing. We're always living under a white supremacist society wherever you go in the world. If 100% of the population is black, it's still white supremacist society because we've been colonized, we've been conditioned to believe that we're less.
Okay. And then Tari, to wrap it up.
It's so hard to speak after no phone because I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Okay. This is so important.
Make it quick.
Okay, sorry. No, I think that I don't know where we draw the line, like, between religion and cultural practices and things like that, but I think, and I don't know how to answer that, but I think human dignity and, like, just somewhere in your heart where you respect human beings, I think that's the first, doorstep to feminism. And in terms of, like, I completely agree with Manuel when we're talking about even if you are, you live in a system that is based on unequal, sexual divisions, okay? And we live in a system of, like, oppression. So it is the path of least resistance is to be those things and to be aware to try to be dignified and to treat people in a dignified way is difficult, and it's a revolutionary act, and I would encourage everyone to join that revolution.
So, just from where to draw the line between religion, cultural practices, and I guess feminism, I'll give an example. In Southern Africa, we pay lobola, which is bride price. So when a woman's getting married, the man pays. So there are two perspectives to this. For example, there have been women who come out saying that men are using this as a tool to abuse us because it makes them feel that they've bought us. But personally, from my own life, I've met men who saved for years, literally saved to marry that one girl. And that's the society. If you can't pay for lobola, we're not giving her away for free. You have to prove to us that you're able to take care of, like I said before, understand the culture without excusing negative aspects to it when they come up.
I agree with that. I think with the issue of bride price, I think a man who's misogynistic or who feels like he owns a woman will feel that way regardless of if he paid money or didn't. I think misogyny is misogyny regardless of if there's a financial transaction. Go ahead.
I'd like to add something on this question. Where do you draw the line between religion, cultural practices such as bride pricing and sexism? You have to understand what perceived sexism is before you try to draw the line. A lot of issues of sexism, it's just perception, and that is solely on you thinking that you're being oppressed based on your gender. You thinking you're being oppressed based on your gender specific.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For example, you could say, let's say a woman might think, oh, man has been sexist to her. Let's say, take a look at, let's say, a comment, right? You can drop a comment. Now, you're not trying to be sexist with that comment to the lady, right? But she takes it as a way of you being sexist, as you've been objectifying her body. Right. Now you'll perceive it.
Intent and impact? Anyone else want to elaborate on that? Have you heard of this? So your intention may be X, but if the impact is Y, it is Y.
See?
There's some background here.
I said something. You have to understand this, right? Not all men are sexist.
I agree.
And
that's not a good example.
I can take devil's advocate and give him an example. I'm not saying I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that, just like, for example, if a man opens the door for a woman, there are actually women who get offended when men do that. But for other women, they're like, wow, that's really nice. So I think that would be an example for Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
I'm going to say something else again. and back to this whole panel, you know, I think our last meeting, a comment came up that was that if you said if a co-worker said to another co-worker that, oh, you look good today or something, right? I see people with you look good.
No, it was actually, I like that outfit or something.
I like the outfit, right? I see people and I see look good. I like your outfit. I'm not being sexist. I'm not objectifying anybody. So if you look at that context, a co-worker says to another co-worker, either from the opposite genders, right? And you know, a male co-worker say to a female co-worker, you look good. Now, female worker can perceive this as being sexist. You know, the male worker is objectifying her body and you know, tends to just highlight key features. Speak of that. But meanwhile, the reverse is the case. You actually mean a genuine comment. You look good.
What about, do you think there's a place where if, for instance, and this conversation happened because one of the other scenarios was the power context is also important, right? So I think you and somebody else were like, what if we're friends? And we're like, yeah, of course, if it's friends telling another friend you look good or whatever. But I think, is there a place where in your mind, if you told a person, you know, you look good, and they were like, I feel uncomfortable with that, is there a place where you're like, actually, I respect that my intention was good, but it made you feel uncomfortable, so I accept that. Is there a place where that happens?
Well, I'm going to say something now. You see, the whole idea of perceived sexism, you know, when you have the idea of sexism and feminism in your mind, when someone gives you a comment, when someone says something to you, you tend to go on the defense and you tend to say this individual is.
Okay, can we not?
I'm gonna wrap it up on that note and open it up to audience question and answer, because it seems like you guys have a lot that you'd like to say. So who would like to start?
Can I voice my objection really quickly? I think there's a double standard because women, when they walk into a workplace, it's not just their intellect that's taken into consideration, it's how they look too. So like when a man can come in sloppy, like a professor who just dresses like casual, but he's just going to be judged by, okay, is what you're saying reasonable? But women have to look good and be young and have some wisdom of like a 90-year-old. That's the problem when you say, oh, you look good today. I think, okay, not that it's a problem in itself, but I think that we should be mature and professional and understand the power relationship, like Boma said. Like, women, it's not just their mind, their intellect, it's like, you look good too. Like, if you don't look good, then you're disregarding. So a man can say the same thing that you said, and then people will nod, but when you say it, they're like,
Any comments from the audience?
well, actually, that's crazy. That's okay. Does anyone have a question?
Questions, contributions, objections?
This isn't related to the last discussion, but so the African cultures that I'm familiar with are very like family-centric.
Like regarding women, I think it would just come from the fact that when you are like the family center, you see it's in the private realm, and that's when you see the woman, the mother, coming home from a labor and now doing like another devalued labor and like cooking, cleaning, being there emotionally for like everybody and being the rock. When I look at my mom, one time she was saying to me like, I'm tired, and I said to her, you can't be tired, like you have to be there all 100% of the time. And I think that societies that are built around the family structure, which I don't know where that is anymore, honestly, can even escape globalization, but like, I would say that, yeah, you would respect it more, and I would say that just me as a daughter, yeah, I respect my mother more when I'm in the house setting, but I do think that I have some like internalized sexism when I'm like in the workplace and I devalue her, or not her, but like the labor of women, which I think proves the system that we live in, which is sucks, but.
Yeah, so I'm gonna speak for myself at least. I don't think my understanding of feminism is that what's gonna change African society. Because at the end of the day, I'm living in a country where 80% of the population is of European descent. of a Western culture. And my understanding of feminism, whether I like it or not, whether I'm aware of Westernism or not, is Western to an extent. So I don't think my understanding of feminism will be very functional in an African society unless I go live there again and alter my understanding to the cultural specificities. Yeah, I said that word correctly. Whoa, of North Africa. So I think it's very important to know that this discussion is very helpful. Hopefully it's going to be fruitful, but it's not going to change the world. I think we're just looking at it from an analytical Canadian at the end of the day perspective, really. So it's like, she's like, what about the family? So I do think, that's the thing, like, I have a different perception of feminism that is Western to an extent. So I think, I have no saying about that. It's just, and the reason I said my understanding of feminism is Western to an extent is because I couldn't even answer that question. Because I'm not very specific to that culture. Although I lived in Libya for 16 years, but
I think just going off of what he said of the understanding of feminism being Western, I guess it's kind of full circle to how I opened saying that the way you understand it from an African perspective and from Western perspective has to sound different. Within my context, we use the word equality, and I guess we already spoke about it, but families, as long as feminism is seen as a destructive word, it will never take root. But I guess the conversations around equality have started, which you can argue that it's the same thing, but as long as people don't like a word, they don't like a word. And I think that as long as families are the central basis of our society within my context, so I think that because of that, people will seek to protect the structures they know and protect those family structures. And as long as they see feminism as being associated with loud women who will be bad wives, it'll be really hard to convince people otherwise.
Well, thank you for the discussion. It's very interesting. So first thing, I'm just going to put out some couple of questions just to think about it. I wonder if we have our conversation without using the word sexism, feminism. I wonder how that would change the perception of the conversation. Because regardless of the forms and the definition of these words, they're basically boxes that are being given to me, registered words that someone gave to me. So I started thinking about my culture as someone from Nigeria, Yoruba person, and I'm thinking, is there any word in itself that would sort of give an understanding of what I think feminism is all about, or sexism? That's one. So again, let's just think about that in terms of, because at the end of the day, we come up with bunches of theories, bunches of words and jargons that we need to relate what is the context of these words to where I'm coming from. What is my background? What is my experience? And what is the reality of things happening? I'll give you an example. So if you have a family, you have children, you have wives, you have husband, and you're talking about house chores and taking care, and there is a perspective that we always look at women as they're meant to nurture, they're meant to nourish and all of that. And you ask a woman, so cooking for your husband, does it devalue you in any way? And she says, no, it does not devalue me in any way, rather it's a way of me showing care. How am I going to interpret that? So again, understanding all of these things from who is giving us these words to even work with. Why are we taking this? What is the context of our own to kind of create things in our own way? Now, I'm not saying that there is no inhumanity, discrimination against the female gender in Africa, in the world. It's not just Africa. But at the end of the day, can we find a niche for ourselves to understand and engage our own experiences? That is one. Number two is, if you count how many, I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect, or I do acknowledge those that do not fall within the binaries, and I'm not trying to strictly say this is the binary. But if you count how many male are in this room, that we could say male, and I'm quoting that, how many are we in this room as against how many females we have in the room? If you go to our classrooms, how many male do we have? How many female do we have? Now, my concern many times is that when we come out with all of these cliches and all of these words, not really knitting them to realities and things happening to us, we sort of start becoming confrontational. We start creating a sense of we're opposing one another, and start building a sense that one is, well, you're discriminating against me, you're doing this, you're doing that. But at the end of the day, where does the place of mutual understanding comes into play? How do we talk about consent? How do we talk about really engaging with one another? Replacing words like feminism and sexism with things like human dignity, respect. One of the panelists talked about the word respect. The word respect, where I'm coming from, is not in any way devalued or looked at you in a way that, or used as a way to suppress you. No, there's some values that when you exhibit them, you show respect to people that you're meant to show respect to in any form. There's a way it even brings you closer to that group of people. So again, how do we bring all of these realities and these perspectives into place?
So I'm gonna try and summarize that question. And then I'll ask you guys to respond.
So yeah, but like I said, it's not a question, it's just that I'm pushing for. So I'm not saying it should be answered, but these are just my thoughts.
They probably want to.
Say, and if they want to answer it, it's good. But at the end of the day, I think it's important we kind of frame our discourse from different standpoint than we are, rather than bringing them to say this, to say that.
Yeah.
I think it's very important. Finally, I'm going to give you a very quick example. One of the Sundays, myself and my wife were headed to church, and she carried her bag, and I had my hands in my pocket, and we had to walk like 10 minutes to the church, and almost everyone that was driving were basically staring at me. They were driving, like I counted over 10 people on the steer and the wheels, and on the steering. They were staring like, guy, I was feeling like something is wrong somewhere. Then I checked my dressed. Like, why are they staring at me? It's like something was wrong with the formation. She was carrying something, and I had my hands in my pocket. Then when we started talking about it later on, I'm like, well, okay, it doesn't really bother me. It's not, do you think that, well, it's not my concern. You see, there are times that some of these things that kind of put a label on. I'm not saying it's not real, but at times we put label on things, we perceive some of these things, and at the end of the day, it changes the dynamics. Well, I'm just going to stop.
So I'm going to want to give each panelist time to answer, but the one thing I want to get at real quick, since we're running out of time, is the idea of when, I don't want to speak on behalf of you guys, but I think knowing you guys, when you guys talk about women's labor being devalued, it doesn't mean that the women don't enjoy cooking for their husbands, but how I understand it is the fact that when you go home, that labor, there is no monetary value. It's hard work, laundry, cooking, cleaning. People get paid $20 per hour to be cleaners, but a woman at home is not getting paid for that, right? I think that's where the idea of devaluing, and also because that labor is looked at as you should do that without the understanding that there is, first of all, it's hard work, and also there's no really appreciation that goes behind that, financial or emotional.
It's not meant to be a generalization when you say there is no acquisition that goes with that. Because even as a man in the house, if you put value on the things that you do, then how do we, then the idea of devaluing, does that, if you monetize it, then we're going into another level of conversation.
I think how I see it at least is when people think of the man versus the woman, right? The man is out there, the breadwinner, going there, making the money, and the woman is just the stay-at-home mom, right? That labor in our society is not looked at the same way we look at what the man is doing outside the home. That's where I think it's not like everything we're talking about today, there's a personal level and there's a societal level. So I think the idea of labor being devalued, we're looking at it more not like I like to cook, my husband appreciates me, but women as a whole, their labor in the household on a societal level is devalued. So I think that conversation is always tricky because people always think about it like all societal things, we think of it more like individual, like, you know, Barack Obama's president, racism still exists. You know, there's the individual level, there's also the larger societal level. And on a societal level, we can't argue that a woman's labor at home is devalued. It's true.
Yeah, you said you had like, that was one question, I had like 3 questions already then. So, in terms of like why we use so many words and cliches, well, it's because words don't have any inherent meaning, like, and words are not trans-historical either. So, obviously, 200 years ago, the same conversation could be happening and you will not hear the word feminism, you will not hear the word gender or equality, you will just hear other words, but that doesn't matter. The words are just words. It's the meaning that's associated with it. No, that's words. If you, Shakespeare said, if you were to call a rose by any other name, would you have any different concept of it? No, you can call it, you know, look at the words for like race. It was like the N-word without the hard R, African American. You can say whatever you want. What you're saying is it's non-white. So that's what I mean when I say words don't have any inherent meaning. It's contextual and it's dependent upon the history. So words come within a context, and that's why today these words are used, because that's the times and that's the academia. Maybe you have a problem with the words, but it wouldn't be the words themselves, it would be the meaning associated with it, right? For example, in the alt-right, if you say diversity, you hear white genocide. Whereas if you're maybe a lefty, when you hear diversity, you say, oh, more inclusion, right? It's not the word, it's the meaning. So I think that's why our words matter, and I think that's why we're talking about them there. And when I talked about the devaluing, it's not to say that, it's kind of like what was said, it's not to say that, oh, women need to become the CEO now and not to cook. No, that's not my feminism. My feminism is about the choice. And so it's about the fact that a woman can say, oh, I want to be cleaning the home, and oh, I want to be president of the country, and you don't say, no, you are not supposed to do that. That's where the feminism comes in. So that's when I say that the labor is devalued. It's like, okay, she's doing all this work, or they're doing all this work, and yet it's demeaned, whereas the man would be doing one job, like analyzing a paper, and that's like regarded so well. Not to say that objectively they're not the same, but it's the value that we add. So I think feminism is about choosing. You can choose to clean your whole life and to be a housewife, but if you have that choice, that's the feminism.
You know, I picked the question he asked over there when he said, how would you look at, is it feminism or sexism in terms of, because African culture is more family oriented. And you know, that question was in my mind for a while. Actually, for my opinion, you know, African culture is more family oriented, and also African culture is more religion oriented. And my perspective of if you mix those two together, you have the word the man is the head of the home, and he's the breadwinner, and religion and culture with sexism, put all those 3 together, it's a whole conflict on its own, because religion says something. So because religion says something, culture. Okay, so religion says something about the head of the home, who is the breadwinner, like, you know, who should be subordinate, and you know, social norms and Western ideologies say something different, that everyone is supposed to be equal, man and woman is supposed to be equal. That's why you have the idea of sexism, right? And African culture is built on a lot of religious principles, and it's not necessarily sexism. It's like he says, these words are attached. There are several forms it comes in. Some acts are not sexism. They're not being sexist. some acts are just basic, way of life. The woman does not necessarily feel devalued. She's, oppressed, but just because the way, there's a norm of doing things, there's a religious way of doing things, she feels this way. It seems pleasant. It's not too bad. I should follow this. And in the family setting, when we say the man is the breadwinner, it's not necessarily that word, that term can be kind of sexist. Because if the man is the breadwinner, that doesn't necessarily oppress and objectify the woman. It's just you say the man is the breadwinner, the woman also doing all sexist. It's just he's a provider of the house. The woman takes care of all the stuff. And right, so it's not necessarily because the man is the breadwinner and the woman. That does not. You're not necessarily devaluing the woman.
We live in a capitalist system, and the whole goal man is the breadwinner. You're basically saying the man is the one that's being useful to the capitalist engine. That's why sexism. Does that make sense?
I think for me, how I think about it also is, can the man stay at home and take care of the kids and cook while the woman is making the money? How would you feel about that?
Well, if that is the case, if the man is staying at home, making, taking care of the kids, and the woman is the one making the money, it's not sexism. It's basically if the man doesn't have the opportunity to go out and make the money, he chooses to stay in the house.
But I think what we're getting at is the fact that, and like Victoria and Tari talked about it, was the fact that when you think of feminism, it is, but why is it how it is, right? Oftentimes women are not able to leave the household and actually make that money because society has told them that they have to go to school, I want to work. But oftentimes when you don't know that that's an option for you, you do what society tells you to do, although there are alternatives that you may want to explore. So Tari, we'll wrap it up with you and we'll call it a night.
So my last point, you mentioned the topic of the words that we give it, and I guess just to put it out there, the ideas of feminism didn't originate in the Western world. Every culture has basic ideas about equality. In my culture, it's called dishonoring each other, and I think that sometimes the conversation makes it sound as if the Western world gave us principles about how to treat each other equally. No. I guess it gave us a different perspective of what equality looks like in a different context, but it didn't teach us what we didn't already know. And I think that in terms of the wording, I guess to go with your point, it could go both ways. You could argue that because we already have words for it, no one else needs to give us a word. But if this word describes what we're trying to say, use it if you want to. And I think that that's right.
Final comments? Somebody over there?
I'm just kind of reflecting on what you said. Anyways, this has been a very engaging and informative discussion. I think, I don't know, I'm going to age myself here. I might be the oldest. I'm with you, probably. Grew up seeing men and women engage in their gender-specific goals to maintain a household. And for me, all this discussion is great. I think the one thing we need to focus on is that, which you talked about earlier, in that family unit, right? That we're all playing roles within the household, within the family, within the village, within whatever, to maintain a family. So that means that I live with a woman and take care of the babies and cook and clean while, quote unquote, all the men would go hunting and went to the farm and brought the water. And it did happen when I was younger. It's not, it wasn't fiction, then that's what it is. My job was no less than what the men did. Growing up in a village where most of the girls didn't have any education, it didn't seem like my job at home was the family. So I think that's something very unique to our culture, and we need to keep that. And I think another danger is that we're seeing in our cultures now, our families, is sort of it used to be that if I, a married woman, had problems with my husband, my father would be calling my husband and say, "You dare lay a hand on that child again, you will see." I guarantee you the man would not lay a hand on that child, on that woman again. So our families are breaking apart to some extent, and I think that is also causing a lot of conflict within our families, within our societies, and kind of raising or giving rise to some of these issues in terms of abuse, people, not treating each other with the ultimate respect. So it's been a very engaging conversation. I've learned a lot. But don't forget that family, that uniqueness of our culture, that's what kept us for this long. So whatever we need to do to keep that, call it feminism, call it whatnot, that's what we need to do. We need to value each other, respect each other, and just know that we are contributing something into the betterment of our families.
Thank you, everybody. On that note, I want to thank each panelist person.
Sorry, just a comment. I think I have been touched by the last comments by Tari and Naye. I feel there's a certain uniqueness about African culture that we take for granted. Oftentimes there's this, I'll call it lazy bastardization of our culture, where we just accept whatever comes in good and second because that's what we have been taught in schools. I think it's about time all of us really sat down to reflect on the essence of African cultural values and practices. First of all, very basic task. I don't know about other African languages, but in my language, there's no distinction between he or she. There's no word for he, there's no word for she. We should start thinking about it. Why is it like that? I think it's very bad brought up the point about, is it Lobola, bride price in your country? Yes, there's a duality to it. You can always see it as a man buying off a woman. But then my understanding of bride price is that the woman's family is trying to put across the message that the woman is expensive, so treat her well. She has a family behind her. If you don't take good care of her, we are coming after you. That's my understanding of it, right? But it's very, very practical for you to also think that it's just about going to buy her off and mistreating or treating her because we bought her off. Take again the issue of colonialism, something that you touched on earlier. Take it from this perspective. First of all, when the Europeans came to Africa, their culture in terms of relationship between a husband and a wife was that a woman or a wife was part of what they call the household shackles, part of household possessions. This woman could not own or possess anything in her name, right? In African culture, at this particular point in time, wives were economic agents. Basically, what we don't pay attention to is the fact that African women run our households. So sometimes there's this, when things get in vogue, we just accept it and go like, okay, so feminism is in vogue, let's talk about it. But I feel in as much as I'm saying this, there are also challenges. But then we shouldn't just throw away what we have. We should try to understand what we have and not take our forefathers and foremothers for granted. They taught two things to their countries.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicole, for your wonderful angle, perspective from Olivia. Thank you, Katie, for that wonderful feisty Guinean Fulani energy. And thank you, Emmanuel, for always deviating from the norm and being very, very, very smart and brave. And Tari, for your wonderful Zimbabwean energy and colorfulness and insight. I really appreciate that. And Victoria, thank you for being fabulous and having that quiet, reserved energy and just being great. And I liked your insight as well about Sudan. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation.